Hi. Yeah. It's a little bit less fun. We've been talking about money. I'm going to talk about power. So at some point, I'm going to talk about power. So I'm going to talk about decentralized and distributed governance. And so why do I talk about governance? When people who are not in this field ask me, why do I talk about governance? I tell them it's pretty simple. When we get to the point where governments can't print money, we're still going to want to do things together as groups. And all governance really is how do we make decisions as a group? So our whole government makes all kinds of decisions, or maybe they don't make decisions very well, but we're going to want to be able to have some kind of way to govern as a group. And even if you're a libertarian, sometimes you want to do something with a group. So that's what power is. My name is Grace. I work with companies. I've been doing a lot of research in this area. The DAO space is even more nascent than the cryptocurrency space, so a lot of the stuff doesn't work great, but there's some very interesting experiments. The second definition is what's a DAO? And the hardest part to understand for people is what does it mean a decentralized autonomous organization? And these are two organizations. We have a head of state trying to meet with organizations. One organization is the Catholic Church. And when the president wants to meet with the Catholic Church, there's one guy. This is a centralized organization. There's the Pope, there's one Pope. And we know who to meet with if we want to meet with the Catholic Church. And in this other corner, we have the President of the United States trying to meet Jews. And Jews are a distributed organization all over the world. They can't even decide what hat to wear. That's a protocol fork. They understand the basic protocol. You must wear a hat, but which hat it is, different protocols. And none of those people are the boss of the other protocol. And, they can't tell each other what to do. But each one of these organizations has different characteristics which make it successful. The Catholic Church is the biggest religion on earth, and they're richer than God. And when they decide to build a church, they build a church wherever they want. If the Pope says it, it happens. The Jewish people, there's no money that's the Jewish money. If they want to build a state or a country, they have to kind of collect from all the different Jews everywhere, and it's donation-based, it's autonomous. And there's something weird about this, which is it's kind of indestructible. There have been many attempts to destroy that group, but they just keep failing because they can't find the top of it and hierarchically cut it off. So each one of these organizations has very different kinds of characteristics, and they're good at different things and successful at different things. So when people come to me with their token or coin or ICO or whatever it is, and they tell me they want a DAO, I'm like, well, are you trying to make money? Because if you're trying to make money, go the way of the Pope. Be centralized. It works. No need for a token. No need for any of that. Centralization is good for making money. Decentralization, you will not be in charge of anything eventually. These guys are not in charge. So that's just a little bit to understand what are we talking about here? Why would you even want a DAO? It's very resilient. Al-Qaeda is a DAO. It's very hard to get rid of. DAOs are just hard to get rid of. And it's more like a movement. DAOs look more like a movement. So what is the kind of technology that people have been building today, and how's it going? And this Aragon article just came out yesterday, so it was very relevant. So there's a number of other technologies, but these are the main ones that people are building on. They're all built on Ethereum right now, except that Aragon announced yesterday that a part of what they're going to be building their own chain using the Cosmos network. And they've said the reason that they're moving is the transaction costs on Ethereum. So what are these things? The DAO stack and Aragon are basically voting technologies. And every time you vote, you got to pay 7 cents to 20 cents, depending on how it's going on Ethereum today, and nobody wants to pay to vote. Especially if you're an organization and you're voting a few times a week, it starts to be really irritating. And Aragon says this is not scalable for a democracy, is to have people paying for votes. And again, it's all very experimental, and we may all be Ethereum skeptics, especially today when we have these kinds of announcements, but it is the only thing people are building on today, and these are all experiments. I don't expect any of them to be the one that wins, but they're informing the future of what this might look like. DAO Stack is also a voting mechanism. Now, the weird thing, and any of you who've looked at the Dash also has a similar kind of thing, which is anyone proposes anything, and then you vote on it. And that sounds kind of more democratic than what we've got, except that anyone proposes anything, you're gonna have a lot of proposals. And you're gonna, like, how do we even begin to vote in a community where everybody can vote, can just throw up a proposal at any time? And how many of you have ever voted? Like, you voted, you've actually gone and voted. None of you have ever voted. And how many of you have ever looked at the ballot and been like, how, none of these, like, no, like, I don't want any of these proposals. And so most of these technologies have started at not where the problem is. The problem isn't with voting. The problem is with the crap that got on the ballot in the first place. So, and voting is, they started with voting because they're technologists. They understand that. Oh, it's binary. Well, voting isn't even binary. Like, wouldn't you rather, like, 3 or 4 different proposals than 2, yes, no, whatever it is? So they started where they know, except for Claros. Claros is a dispute resolution system, which is great, except disputes only happen after the governance. So they've kind of started from what I consider the end of governance. So how would I look at governance? And you'll see voting is a little red thing and everything else is bigger. This isn't everything in the area of governance. One area is identity. If you want to give people a vote, you got to know it's a person. That's beyond the scope, and there's different solutions for that. Another one is news and information. If you want to make a decision, you should have good information. And there are a number of projects working on that. I haven't seen anything impressive yet, but that's also part of governance. Governance, basically for me, happens in 3 main stages. One is discussion, like we're talking about something, and we kind of figure out it's a problem. Let's say we live in this town, Cluj, and there's wires everywhere, electrical wires, and they're a bit of an eyesore, and they're maybe bad for the environment, and we're worried about the electrical wires everywhere. And we've been talking about it enough, and you have these signaling apps that can say, okay, this is a problem. People agree this is a problem. And then you go to the next stage, which is, okay, now that we've agreed what the problem is, let's start getting some proposals. And then, hopefully the best proposals will come somewhere, and you'll vote on them. And then you'll execute them. And execution is another area where our governments are really, really bad. So you have things like AML, which has been in place for 20 years. I don't think it's reduced crime. I believe the statistic is that AML catches 0.6% of money laundering, which most people would consider a failure. And it's costing us a lot of money, except for those of us who've opted out, which isn't the majority of but every time you use a bank, you're paying for AML, which is like 99.4% ineffective. So, and that's what governance is, and it all happens inside a culture. And the culture is determined by a lot of things, and how we talk to each other sometimes is determined by the vote. And we see that in our culture today. Because most of the votes we have are yes, no votes, Brexit, yes or no, Donald or Hillary, which one, blue or red, most of our votes are like that. Our talk is like that. We've created this culture of divisiveness, like either you're a Bitcoin maximalist or you're not. Like, the world's more nuanced. Most of the things we care about are more nuanced than that. But if all you can vote is you're in this group or that group, then your conversation gets very shallow. And so inside that culture, you're going to get certain types of discussions. Now, one of the things that we haven't talked about, and I won't go any deeper into that today, is how do you change the habits of discussion? But we know it's doable. And we know it's doable because we have Instagram and Facebook, which have changed the way people talk to each other. The volume, the tone, they reward people for being sensationalist. It's not really good for democracy, it's not good for people working together, is to reward the most extreme views. But we did change behavior at least through that means, so it's quite possible that we could create another means to change behavior that's more collaborative. So that's communication. So how do these things look? Oops. This is how this is the DAO stack. These things are just like crypto. If you're not holding it and trying it, it's like kind of theoretical. So I play around with these systems quite a bit. This is the Genesis DAO, and you can see there's these proposals, and anybody can make a proposal. They have something they call holographic consensus. If you want to know what it is, I can talk about it later. But the idea is it's a staking mechanism where you bet on which proposal you think is the best, and those proposals float up and get voted on later. So it's a bit of a algorithmic prediction market, which proposals are the best, so that you don't get overwhelmed by a million proposals. And then once they're boosted, you vote on them. And again, every vote and every stake costs you money. I picked this particular one, I was lucky today, because here's one of the proposals, which is that all members be identified by your real name. I mean, like, this is the last thing we need, is our one anonymous system identifying us. And this guy, Eric, he's a great guy, and I don't want to vote against his proposal, even though it's stupid, because he's like got more power in the organization than I do, and I'm not anonymous. So being identified is causing a huge amount of politics in this particular DAO. It's just like constant, like, don't vote against him or me, or you're hurting other people, and it's devolved into this weird thing. Anyway, so that's one of the things. It is working, it's up, it works, people vote on it, they've run a number of hackathons on it. I'll talk a little bit about the experiments that are working, but anything beyond pretty simple yes or no binary decisions isn't really working well, and the culture around that is just basically a bunch of people who've been trained on Facebook how to communicate with each other, talking on chat. So it devolves pretty quickly. Even though all these people are fanatics, right? We're all kind of crypto-anarchist fanatics, otherwise you wouldn't spend any time getting into these systems. Onboarding yourself onto one of these, much, much, much harder than just trading a few Bitcoins. It's just like, you gotta have MetaMask, and it's just, I don't wanna talk about it. That was like 2 months of my life I'll never get back. So these are some of the experiments that are working, and they're quite well defined. And these people have created very good problem definition statements, and they've created binary problems. So Ethnix is one of the most interesting experiments. They actually used a dispute resolution system, the Claro system, and they decided to let all of their token holders decide what shitcoins get listed. And there was discussion about it. Any coin could say, I want to get listed on your exchange, and anyone could dispute that, and you could stake some token to say, look, I don't think they should be listed. And there were long debates, and at the end of a period of time, all the voters voted yes, no, goes on the exchange and doesn't. They had 15 rounds of voting. It was incredibly successful. They had 70% voter turnout. Like, the traders really cared which coins got listed. And they even had a couple of incidents where a coin that did not get listed fixed its problems, and a few months later was able to pass the process. So it even made the coin slightly less shitty, you could say. But that kind of process, if you think about that as a democratic process, it's actually making the environment better, okay? Maybe you started at a low point, but if that kind of process were implemented for something more meaningful than what gets listed on an exchange, it could improve society. So that's why I call that successful. The other ones are pretty basic. DORG basically uses this as a multi-sig wallet. It's the first organization to be incorporated as a DAO. It's incorporated as a BBC LLC in Vermont. And anybody who joins the online platform, which is again on DAOstack, anyone who joins that platform automatically, by law, is a limited partner in that organization, in that company. And so it's the first time the law is recognizing this technology, which is pretty cool. Nexus Mutual is basically a crypto insurance fund. So, is the claim valid, not valid? Very simple. Bitoken is an investment thing. MakerDAO distributes funds. So these are pretty simple, financial, pretty yes or no decisions, not too complex. What's not working is anything more complex. I talked a little bit about the Genesis DAO, where it's kind of the conversation is kind of devolved into bickering because there's no clear definition statement. They have between $15,000 and $30,000 of funds that they get to distribute among themselves, and people propose what to do with the money. But there's no real good clarity around what the mission is, and should we be doing the marketing with that, or should we be developing apps with that, or should we be, what should we be? So there's this like kind of really huge gap within the community. What do we talk about? CuraDAO is an even bigger failure. They want to create in Curacao some alternative funding methods for projects in the community, but onboarding people onto this thing was so hard. They had a whole like 2-day event, and they invited people, and they came, and they got 40 people onboarded. It's just that complicated. And so they can't even get enough people onboarded to the technology to start having governance. Here's the missing pieces. If I were to make a map, like Theo had this map of all the technology in the area and NFTs. In the area of governance, it would be half as big. There just is a lot of opportunity, or if you think it's not going anywhere, no opportunity. But there's very little technology there. And the missing pieces are, first of all, reputation without identity. So some of these systems give you reputation, and they might be more tokens, more reputation, which is money buys power. Pretty uninteresting. We know how that looks. We have good examples. The Genesis has something called Gen, which is a token that represents your reputation, but you use MetaMask as your identifier. So you could have 3 MetaMask identifiers. You could play around with reputation. And reputation is one-dimensional. So I don't have any reputation as a programmer, but I might have reputation as a speaker, and just having one number this is your reputation is very, very flat, because different people have different talents. And so there is a whole realm of identity solutions that are starting to be developed around this, but they're not being used by the governance system. So one MetaMask account, one vote is the best they can do. Community without cultural norms, which I spoke about. It's like, we're going to be in a DAO, and we haven't decided what are, how to interact with one another, or what are our values together. Proposals without problem definition, which is what I described before. Like, hey, I've got an idea. Can you imagine, like, every time anyone had an idea, said, hey, I've got an idea, everyone else had to talk about it because, hey, I've got an idea. I mean, it's just nice. Winner takes all. This is one of the reasons that these are devolving into these kinds of bickering. There's a winner-take-all system. So if you really think about how a company, for example, makes decisions, you've got an organization, you're working together, you're getting paid a salary. So it's like, hey, we're all going to brainstorm what the new product ideas are for next year. It's not like the person with the best product idea, they might get a bonus, but they're not the only one who gets paid. Everybody's getting paid to participate. Everybody's getting paid for the brainstorming session. Everybody's who says, you know what, that's a good idea, but how about you modify that? They're getting paid for their time. In these systems, you put up a proposal and you either get the money or not. And all the time you spent campaigning and politicking and talking to others and getting their input, that's just, if you win, you get money for it. And if you don't, you put a proposal up, you put all the blood, sweat, and tears into that, and there's nothing. And what that creates is, again, resentment and conflict of interest between people who are part of the same organization. Like, we all said we're going to get together and have a DAO, and we all have the same morals and same values, but now, like, he got all the money even though I spent almost as much time as making a proposal as he did. It just automatically creates this kind of nasty feeling. And one way for all decisions, which is my next slide. if we think about how we make decisions, so again, if we're in Cluj and there's these electrical wires and they're making our city ugly, and we've decided that's our problem, there's different things that go into our problem definition. There are many ways we might decide that our organization should do it. We might say, you know what? We already elected some guys. They're the town council. They take care of it. That's how we make decisions here. We might say, you know what? We really need some experts. We're going to look for the top experts, and we're going to have them make proposals, and we're only going to let experts make proposals. You might say everybody who is in town could make, throw out a brainstorming ideas. We're going to have a big brainstorming session. We're going to take some of the similar ideas. We're going to put people in groups. We're going to create a whole system. You could say we're going to have a contest. For 3 months, anybody can put in a proposal and we'll have a contest. That's how real organizations work. In reality, if you work at a company, there's hackathons in the company, there's some decisions that are just, all right, if you have an idea and you have people on your team, go, do it. Nobody votes on it, just go. That's the reality. And each one of these DAO systems has their own way of doing it. So Colony actually has a system which is, if you can raise the funds, you can do the project. But then you have to use Colony, and what if I'm using Aragon? And each one, it's like there's supposed to be one true God about how to make decisions. And the reality is that's not the way it is. In fact, probably only 10% of the decisions that we make are ones that even need a vote. Mostly it's like, yeah, sure. Or that's just not something we all have to worry about together, or you can fork it. A lot of things you can just go ahead and do it your way. It doesn't bother anybody. But for those 10% of the problems, this is where I'm the most interested. I call it no-fork proposal making. And I'm starting to develop some technologies and apps around no-fork. And if you see me walking around with my chopsticks, I've stopped using forks. And it's not because I don't think that there should be forks. The forks are easy. When we don't agree, and me going this way and you going that way makes no difference to the rest of society, it's fine. But the most interesting problems we have, and the ones that I think DAOs have the most potential to solve, are no-fork situations. Again, we all live in this town. If the rent goes up, some of our oldest residents, the people with the history of the town, the people with the culture of the town, our old neighborhoods start getting destroyed. It's destroying the fabric of our society if we say, well, just fork off, go live somewhere else. It affects all of us if our grandparents can't afford to live in our town. We all live on a planet, and if somebody's burning up California or burning up the Amazons, we all have air inside our lungs, and there's nothing we can do. It's a no-fork situation. And this is where I think this technology has the most potential, and I believe the potential is in the proposal-making processes and in the culture. How do we do everything before the vote differently? And this is the biggest area where I'm going to be focusing on. Like I said, building some dApps and some technology on how do we create culture of collaboration? How do we get the best proposals on the table so people don't ask us stupid questions like Brexit, yes or no? Like, there's got to be some better options, or 4 different proposals for what would Brexit look like, so that people aren't voting on something that's just bad, really, both options. And this is what I do for a living. Oh, that's an empty slide. But this is what I do for a living, is I help organizations deal with this stuff. I do leadership training. I work with these people who've raised money and don't really have any management experience. It's like, oh, I've got $15 million. What am I going to do with that? Like, how do I manage these people, right? So, and I brought a bunch of my books. They're out on the table. You're welcome to have them. If you don't carry books and you'd like the PDF or the Kindle version, just, I'll give you a free one. It's really no trouble. Yeah, and that's me.